What happens when royalty meets late-night television and everything goes completely wrong? In just 33 seconds, one comment turned a friendly interview into the most explosive exit in talk show history. Jon Stewart sat behind his desk that evening, ready for what should have been just another interview. The audience buzzed with excitement. Prince Harry walked onto the stage with his usual confident stride, waving to the crowd as they erupted in applause. Stewart stood up, shook his hand, and both men settled into their seats. "Welcome to the show," Stewart said with his trademark grin. "Great to have you here." "Happy to be here," Harry replied, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. Stewart started with a softball question about Harry's recent charity work. The prince launched into a rehearsed answer about helping veterans and disadvantaged youth. The audience clapped politely. Everything seemed normal. But Stewart, being the skilled interviewer he is, wanted to dig a little deeper. He wanted something real, something beyond the polished talking points. "That's wonderful work," Stewart said. "But let me ask you something. You've talked a lot about privacy and wanting to live a normal life. Yet you've done multiple interviews, documentaries, a book. How do you square that circle?" The audience went quiet. Harry's smile faded just slightly. He shifted in his seat. "Well, John, I think that's a bit of a simplistic way to look at it," Harry said, his tone cooling. "There's a difference between choosing to tell your own story and having it told for you by people who don't know you." "Sure," Stewart nodded, "but you're still putting yourself out there. You can't have it both ways, can you? You can't say you want privacy while simultaneously doing the publicity circuit." Harry's jaw tightened. "I think you're missing the point entirely." "Am I?" Stewart asked, not backing down. "Help me understand then." "The point is control," Harry said, his voice rising slightly. "The point is that I spent my entire life having stories made up about me, lies printed about me, my family used against me. So yes, I'm telling my story. That's my right." "Absolutely it is," Stewart agreed. "I'm just asking about the contradiction. You want privacy, but you're everywhere. That's a fair question." Harry leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know what it's like to have your mother chased to her death by photographers? Do you know what that does to a child?" The audience gasped. Stewart's expression shifted. He spoke carefully. "I can't imagine that pain," Stewart said softly, "and I'm not trying to minimize what you've been through. But we're talking about your choices now, as an adult." "My choices?" Harry's voice got louder. "You think these are just choices? You sit here in your comfortable studio, making jokes, judging people you don't know. You have no idea what it's like." Stewart remained calm, which only seemed to irritate. "Harry Moore." "I'm not judging you," Stewart said. "I'm asking you questions. That's what happens in an interview." "No, you're attacking me," Harry shot back. "Just like everyone else. I came here thinking you were different. I thought you were supposed to be one of the good guys." "I am asking you fair questions," Stewart replied, his tone still even. "If you can't handle basic questions about your public statements, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." The audience murmured. This was getting uncomfortable. Harry stood up slightly in his chair, his face flushed. "Maybe I shouldn't be here at all," Harry said. "Maybe this was a mistake." "Hey, you're welcome to leave if you want," Stewart said, spreading his hands. "But running away from questions isn't going to make them go away." That seemed to hit a nerve. Harry's eyes flashed with anger. "Running away?" he repeated. "You think I'm running away? I've faced more in my life than you could ever imagine. I've served my country. I've dealt with loss that would break most people. And you sit there with your smug little questions, acting like you know something." "I never claimed to know your life," Stewart said firmly. "But I do know that you came on this show. You agreed to this interview. And now you're upset because I'm not just lobbing you softballs and letting you promote your latest project." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Harry said, his voice shaking with frustration. "This is exactly why we left. People like you, the media, Everyone thinking they have a right to pick apart every single thing I do. People like me? Stewart's eyebrows raised. I'm a comedian who asks questions. If that's too much for you, then yeah, maybe you should leave. Harry stood up fully now. The audience went completely silent. You could hear people breathing. The tension was thick enough to cut. You know what? I will, Harry said, ripping off his microphone. I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be disrespected by someone who makes a living mocking people. I'm not mocking you, Stewart said, still seated, still calm. I'm interviewing you. There's a difference. No, you're belittling me, Harry said, pointing at Stewart. You're sitting there acting superior, like you have all the answers. You don't know what it's like to be in my position. You're right, I don't, Stewart said, but I do know what it's like to have a conversation. And this isn't one. This is you getting defensive because you don't like the questions. Harry's face turned red. You want to know what I think? I think you're a bitter, cynical man who tears people down to make yourself feel better. I think this whole show is just an excuse for you to feel important. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Stewart's expression hardened. Okay, Stewart said slowly. If that's how you feel, then we're done here. Oh, we're done? Harry laughed bitterly. You're dismissing me now? That's rich. The great Jon Stewart can't handle someone pushing back. I can handle pushing back just fine, Stewart said. What I can't handle is someone coming on my show and personally attacking me because they don't like being asked basic questions. You're acting like a child. A child? Harry's voice reached a new level. You're calling me a child? After everything I've been through? After everything I've survived? What you've been through doesn't give you a free pass to be rude, Stewart said, his voice firm but controlled. It doesn't mean you get to come on here and insult me when I ask you about your own public statements. This is unbelievable, Harry said, shaking his head. Absolutely unbelievable. I came here in good faith, and this is what I get. You came here to promote yourself, Stewart corrected. And when I didn't just let you do your talking points, you lost it. That's on you, not me. Harry took a step toward the desk. You know what your problem is? You think you're so smart. You think you have everything figured out. But you're just another media person trying to make a name off of me. I had a name long before you got here, Stewart said, and I'll have one long after you leave. Which, by the way, you said you were going to do. So please, don't let me keep you. You're kicking me off your show, Harry asked, his voice incredulous. You said you were leaving, Stewart replied. I'm just agreeing with you. You clearly don't want to be here. And honestly, after the way you've behaved, I don't want you here either. The audience was completely frozen. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others were looking at each other in disbelief. This was not how these things usually went. This is going to look terrible for you, Harry said, pointing at Stewart again. Kicking off a member of the royal family. Everyone's going to see this. Let them see it, Stewart said calmly. They'll see someone who couldn't handle a simple interview. They'll see someone who came on a talk show and threw a tantrum when asked reasonable questions. If that makes me look bad, I'll take that risk. Harry stared at him for a long moment, his chest heaving. You're making a huge mistake. The only mistake I made was thinking we could have an actual conversation, Stewart said. Now please, leave my stage. Fine, Harry said, his voice tight. I'm going. And you know what? This show is a joke. You're a joke. This whole thing is beneath me. Then you should have no problem leaving, Stewart replied. Harry turned and started walking off the stage, but he stopped after a few steps and turned back around. You'll regret this, he said. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm dealing with someone who can't take criticism, Stewart said, and someone who thinks their title means they're above being questioned. That's who I'm dealing with. I've dealt with real journalists, Harry said, people who actually know how to conduct an interview with respect. Respect is earned, Stewart said, And you lost mine the second you started attacking me personally instead of answering questions." Harry opened his mouth to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. He shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and walked off the stage. The camera caught him nearly bumping into a stagehand as he disappeared into the wings. The audience sat in stunned silence for what felt like forever. Stewart turned to face the camera directly. He took a breath and adjusted his tie. "Well," he said to the audience, "that was something." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Stewart ran his hand through his hair. "You know, I've been doing this for a long time," he continued. "I've interviewed presidents, celebrities, world leaders, and I always try to be fair. I always try to ask real questions, because that's the job. That's what you're supposed to do." The audience started clapping, slowly at first, then building. "Sometimes people don't like the questions," Stewart went on. "Sometimes they get uncomfortable, but usually we work through it. We have a conversation. That's how this is supposed to work." More applause. Stewart held up his hand. "But every once in a while," he said, "you get someone who thinks they're above all that. Someone who thinks their status or their story means they shouldn't have to answer tough questions. And when that happens, when someone comes on here and acts like I'm the problem for doing my job, well, there's the door." The audience erupted in applause and cheers. Stewart nodded, accepting it. "I respect what he's been through," Stewart said, his tone serious now. "I really do. Nobody should have to experience what he experienced as a child. But that doesn't mean he gets to come on my show and treat me like garbage when I ask him about his own words. It doesn't work that way." The applause continued. Stewart waited for it to die down. "So yeah," he said, "that just happened. A prince walked off my show because I asked him about privacy while he's doing a publicity tour. Make of that what you will." He turned to face the camera more directly, speaking to the viewers at home. "We're going to take a quick break," he said. "When we come back, we'll try to salvage what's left of tonight's show, assuming nobody else decides to storm off." The audience laughed, the tension finally breaking. But as the camera pulled back, you could see the shock still on people's faces. They had just witnessed something unprecedented. A member of the royal family having a complete meltdown on live television. A heated exchange that went from civil to explosive in minutes. Stewart had remained calm throughout the entire ordeal. He never raised his voice. He never stooped to personal attacks until Harry made it personal first. He asked fair questions, and Harry couldn't handle it. That was the story. That was what people would remember. The prince, who had spoken so often about being mistreated by the media, had just proven that maybe the problem wasn't always the media. Maybe sometimes the problem was how he reacted to basic scrutiny. Maybe the issue was that he expected to be treated with kid gloves simply because of who he was. Stewart had refused to do that. He treated Harry like he would treat anyone else sitting in that chair. He asked the questions that needed to be asked. And when Harry lashed out, when he started making personal attacks, Stewart stood his ground. He didn't back down. He didn't apologize for doing his job. That's what made Stewart the good guy in this situation. That's what made the audience rally behind him. He was just trying to have a real conversation, and Harry turned it into a battle. Harry made it personal. Harry threw the tantrum. Harry stormed off. All Stewart did was ask questions. Questions that Harry should have been prepared for. Questions that were completely fair given Harry's own public statements about wanting privacy while living a very public life. It was a legitimate point to raise. Any decent interviewer would have raised it. But Harry couldn't see that. He couldn't see past his own defensiveness. He couldn't separate fair questioning from attack. And when he felt challenged, he lashed out. He insulted Stewart. He insulted the show. He acted like he was too good to be there. The microphone Harry had ripped off lay on the chair where he'd been sitting. The stagehand eventually came and retrieved it. The chair sat empty for the rest of the show. a reminder of what had just transpired. Stewart continued with his monologue after the break, making a few jokes about what happened, but mostly moving on. He's a professional. He wasn't going to let one entitled guest derail the entire evening, but you could tell it had gotten to him. You could see it in his eyes when he made brief references to the incident. Not anger exactly, but disappointment. Disappointment that someone he'd probably looked forward to interviewing had turned out to be so unable to handle basic scrutiny. The production staff buzzed around during the commercial breaks, dealing with the fallout. Security had escorted Harry out of the building. The remaining guests who were scheduled to appear later in the show had to be told what happened. Everyone was in minor shock. This kind of thing just didn't happen on late-night television. Sure, interviews went south sometimes. Guests got uncomfortable. There were awkward moments. But a full-blown meltdown with personal insults and a dramatic exit. That was rare. That was the kind of thing people would talk about for years. And it all came down to one thing: Harry's inability to handle legitimate questions about his own contradictions. His expectation that he would be treated differently because of his title and his trauma. His belief that questioning him was the same as attacking him. Stewart had exposed that, not intentionally perhaps. He was just doing his job. But in doing so, he'd revealed something about Harry that the prince probably didn't want revealed. That beneath the polished public image and the carefully crafted narrative, there was someone who couldn't handle pushback. Someone who expected deference and reacted badly when he didn't get it. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. Stewart, calm and composed, asking reasonable questions and maintaining his professionalism even when insulted. Harry, defensive and aggressive, taking everything as a personal attack and ultimately fleeing when he couldn't control the narrative. One looked like a seasoned professional who knew how to handle difficult conversations. The other looked like someone who was used to having his way and didn't know what to do when he didn't get it. One came across as reasonable and fair. The other came across as entitled and immature. Stewart didn't have to try to make Harry look bad. Harry did that all by himself. All Stewart did was create the space for Harry to reveal who he really was. And Harry took that opportunity and ran with it, straight off the stage and out of the building. The audience that night got more than they bargained for. They came expecting a pleasant interview with some jokes and maybe some interesting stories. Instead, they witnessed a complete breakdown of civility. They saw a prince lose his composure. They saw a host maintain his dignity in the face of personal attacks. They saw real tension, real anger, real drama. It was uncomfortable. It was awkward. But it was also riveting. Nobody could look away. Nobody wanted to miss a second of it. Because this was real. This wasn't scripted. This was two people having a genuine conflict, and one of them handling it much better than the other. Stewart's questions about privacy and publicity weren't unfair. They weren't gotcha questions. They were the exact questions most people watching had probably wondered about themselves. How can someone claim to want privacy while doing constant media appearances? It's a valid thing to ask. It's not disrespectful to point out that contradiction. But Harry took it as disrespect. He took it as an attack. And in doing so, he showed everyone watching that maybe he wasn't as media savvy as he thought. Maybe he wasn't as comfortable with scrutiny as he claimed. Maybe the whole wanting privacy thing was less about actual privacy and more about wanting to control his own narrative without pushback. Stewart had pushed back, gently at first, then more firmly when Harry got defensive. But he never crossed the line into actual disrespect until Harry made it personal. And even then, Stewart's responses were measured. He called Harry out for his behavior, but he didn't insult him the way Harry had insulted Stewart. That restraint made Stewart look even better. He could have torn into Harry. He could have really let him have it. But he didn't. He stayed professional. He made his point without stooping to Harry's level. That's the mark of someone who knows what they're doing. someone who doesn't need to get into a shouting match to win an argument. Harry, by contrast, looked like he was in over his head. He looked like someone who was used to friendly interviews where nobody challenged him. Someone who expected to be able to say whatever he wanted without any follow-up questions. Someone who thought his story and his status would shield him from having to defend his positions. Stewart had treated him like any other guest, and Harry couldn't handle it. That was the real story. That was what people would take away from this. Not the specific questions asked or the specific insults thrown, but the fundamental dynamic of a host doing his job and a guest completely falling apart because of it. The empty chair remained a powerful symbol. A reminder that Harry had given up. That when things got tough, when he was challenged, he ran. He didn't try to salvage the interview. He didn't try to find common ground. He just left. And in leaving, he proved Stewart's point better than Stewart ever could have. If Harry really believed in what he was saying, if he really had solid answers to these questions, he would have stayed. He would have defended himself calmly and rationally, but he didn't. He got emotional. He got personal. And he quit. That speaks volumes about someone's character and confidence in their own positions. Stewart knew this. You could see it in his face after Harry left. Not smugness, but a kind of sad vindication. He'd been right to push those questions, and Harry's reaction had confirmed that they were questions worth asking. If there were good answers, Harry would have given them. Instead, he threw a fit. The show eventually wrapped up. The audience filed out, already pulling out their phones to tell people what they'd just witnessed. The crew started breaking down the set. And somewhere outside the building, a prince was probably realizing that he'd just made a huge mistake. That his tantrum would be the story, not whatever message he'd come to deliver. Stewart went back to his office, probably needing a moment to process what had just happened. In all his years doing this, he'd never had someone react quite like that. Never had someone so completely lose control over such basic questions. It had to be jarring, even for someone as experienced as him. But he'd handled it. That's what mattered. When confronted with someone acting unreasonably, he'd remained reasonable. When attacked personally, he'd defended himself without losing his cool. When challenged to kick someone off his show, he'd done it because it was the right thing to do. That's leadership. That's professionalism. That's how you handle a difficult situation with grace and dignity. Stewart had demonstrated all of those qualities. Harry had demonstrated none of them. And everyone watching had seen the difference. Clearly, the incident would live on in television history. The night a prince stormed off a talk show because he couldn't handle basic questions. The night Jon Stewart proved why he's one of the best in the business. The night everyone learned that sometimes the most revealing interviews are the ones that fall apart completely.